are a very interesting mix. Very quickly, Mr. Narayanan here, my friend, is of course from Titan Industries, looking at the retail end of the world and the retail training. And therefore, he's going to be the one who actually buys the stuff and helps us understand how we can sell better to him, since many of you are education providers in the audience. The rest of us here are all have done various forms of online, offline, blended, pure play, MOOC, and different formats, delivering both into consumer and corporations. But I think the main scenario for us is this morning, and through a lot of the discussions we had today, there was a lot of conversation in the previous panel about K-12, IIT prep, test preparation in general, and the corporate world is a little bit of a different beast. The corporate world tends to be driven by multiple needs. There's the general training of capability, which we all talked about, saying employability is not good enough when people enter. But then there's a second aspect of continued and lifelong learning. How do I get better at my job? How will I get the promotion? How will I get the career? Technology keeps changing. I have to now learn big data. Tomorrow I have to learn AngularJS. I have to learn something else. And that leads to its own opportunity. And those things are typically not certificate programs. Those are not degrees. Those are really about how do you learn, do you understand it. And in corporations, there's a third dimension which is extremely important. Do you understand what to do with my product, my processes, my business, which typically tends to get done in-house, but the organizations as they scale, as they go out to channels, partners, distributors, agents, insurance agents, how do you teach these large numbers of people that are almost like consumers, but have to be taught what we need them to learn, but that content can't be picked off the shelf. So the corporation has a more difficult challenge. It has to look at lifelong aspirations of its people for talent retention. It has to look at readiness and capability for the latest technology that can be picked off the shelf. And it has to look at what are specific needs that are relevant to the organization. Now, what's different than when I helped co-found a company many years ago? What's very different now is, in those days, back in the late 90s, even though online learning in CBT or WBT formats had arrived, the onus was largely on a corporation to assemble all the pieces. They had to bring in all of this stuff, create all of this stuff, put the instructors together, run a training center somewhere in the country, up in the nice hills, hopefully somewhere where everybody went on holiday, and do all of this. But since then, what has happened is multiple things have happened. Number one, the technologies for what people need to understand have gotten better. So learning management systems matured, talent management systems of various formats have arrived. Second, content tools have gotten better. There's more drag and drop. You can put stuff together. You can do video. You can take a subject matter expert and record this stuff. And what else has happened is that the barrier of the internet to the intranet has disappeared. And all sorts of content has arrived online in the form of the Udemys, the Coursera's, or any number of MOOCs or content sources that can be delivered straight into the organization, where things that you can pick off the shelf can be taught. Finally, because virtual classroom technologies and these kind of systems have arrived, it's become possible for education providers that were doing brick and mortar classroom training outside to also deliver their courses directly into the organization where people sit and live and continue. So suddenly all sorts of avenues have opened up, and mobile, of course, makes it possible to learn on the go. And these are busy people. Nobody has time to send people back out, take them off their sales job, not make their quota, go to class for 1 week. So the dynamics are very, very different. And all of these trends have to come together. So this panel is going to talk about this. I'm going to lead off with Mr. Narayanan, sir. When you look at your problems of retail training, you have a very complex chain that you're trying to train.
Good afternoon. Our company is actually a very evolved company. In fact, we started with watches. Then we broke into the jewelry industry. We became the pioneers, and thereafter we came into the eyewear division, which again started booming in the last 2 or 3 years. And currently, most of our stores are profitable, and we get a lot of franchisees who are quite keen to actually take up business. But when it comes to, say, training and the challenges which we encounter, there are two type of challenges in, when in the corporate world. One is certainly capability building of our workforce, and the second piece is the workforce which is working or the frontline workforce which is there in the stores. And frankly speaking, with more and more stores coming up, you really don't get good people. And it becomes a real challenge to build their capability. And most of the time, when you talk to corporates, you will understand that they talk about customer experience. And customer experience is something that we all are struggling for. We all put up a vision saying that our vision actually states elevating experience and significantly impact. These are two words that we use, but we are still struggling to actually give that elevating experience to the customer and bring in that significant impact to all our stakeholders. The biggest challenge that we see is that the interface between the sales guy and the customer doesn't seem to be an equal relationship. When it starts with an equal relationship, probably the respect goes up, the experience actually becomes richer. But when it starts at a much lower level, that's where the need for training comes in. You have to coach, you have to build in the knowledge, you have to really scale them up. And that becomes the bigger challenge. And with more and more stores, in fact, we have, as of March 31st, 2015, we had 1,203 stores. And 1,203 stores amounting to 13,000 employees in those stores. Now imagine training each and every individual and expecting the kind of customer experience that the company is envisaging. That becomes a huge challenge for us.
If I can ask a couple questions, you already answered the first one. About 30,000 employees to train. Does that include your channel partners and others that you also have to cover?
This is purely retail.
Okay.
Apart from that, we have a trade channel in watches. In fact, our watches business has a 50-50 contribution coming from retail and trade. And the trade business is so unorganized. In fact, these guys have actually developed from being, say, watch repairers, and then they have started selling watches. And today, some of them are organized retailers, some of them are still unorganized. And a lot of these salespeople actually talk about the brand, they try to sell the brand to the customers. So it becomes a much bigger challenge in that space. And when you talk to our retail guys, in fact, the guys whom we regularly train, we have our own LMS platform, we have online, we have on the job, we have classroom, we do everything. But still they say that, sir, अगर पढ़ना लिखना होता तो हम थोड़ी बेच रहे होते. This is the standard dialogue that comes in, because they don't tend to understand what we want to communicate or what is so important that they have to learn. And many times they give up. They start, and as Mr. Dham was saying in the morning, 90% of the people give up. And we also face the same problem. People tend to give up. They just don't want to continue.
Okay. Let me switch gears. Vivek, I'm going to come to you. If you can quickly describe the company, of course, and the business. And really, you've looked at custom content, content capabilities, and bringing learning into a format that's consumable. You want to talk about it and your impact and what you see really having shifted the last few years.
Sure. Can you hear me? So I represent Liqvid. We are, we have a custom e-learning solutions business. We work with some large companies, HP, Philips, to create their custom learning solutions. And then we have our English language business, which we sell into schools and colleges and other people here in India. And now increasingly doing it on, as a mobile first, especially in this part of the world. So from a corporate training perspective, I think, what we've seen, so I'll tell you quickly what we've seen and then a couple of points that, first is clearly that there are a lot of change happening, right? Learning is there are a lot of restructuring, and restructuring goes on for months and years, right? And the new requirements come up, and people, so there is there is always a lot of flux, right? And I think the reason for that is that learning is at the bottom of the the traditional HR or learning and development is at the bottom of the priority, right? It gets cut off, first signs of trouble, and it gets cut off. And obviously the reason for that is it's not having, I don't think business people are seeing the impact that training should have. And there are two good reasons for that. One is, general sense, I think point that doesn't get highlighted enough is learning is hard, right? I mean, 80% of learning effectiveness, I believe, depends on the learner himself, right? Unless she's willing to internalize and engage and follow up and all of that, you're not going to achieve your objectives, right? So it's hard. Secondly, a school, we talk of dropout rates from online courses. Every child I know in school would not go to school if it was not compulsory, right? So dropout rate of schools could be maybe higher. So learning is broadly, I think, difficult, and a lot of time we underestimate the challenge, I think. Second, in a corporate especially, there's this 70-20-10 rule. Somebody came up long back, I think 50 years ago, which said 70% of the learning is on the job, 20% is sort of peer learning, and only 10% is the traditional courses, classes, that type of learning, right? And that percentage may be here and there, but that's not the point. I think most of us training providers are focused on that 10%. And it fits in nicely with the HR structure, so many hours of learning, so many people trained, so many man-hours, so much blah, blah, blah. And I think that's making the training to be less effective. There are no good metrics I remember I had an engagement, I talked to one senior guy in HP, and I said, why don't we look at the social, interactive stuff? He said, how do we measure it? How do we measure how many hours, how many this and that? So I think the learning is now increasingly has to move in that direction, more informal, integrated with the workflow, when I want it, as opposed to what I might need later. It has to move in that direction.
Okay, thank you. I'll just add to that. In my previous life, selling to corporate LMSs, we saw more and more of the sort of company-specific sales training, for example, starting to be done by subject matter experts online. So an online subject matter expert who is not a formal trainer holding a virtual session that can then be consumed by everybody that can just log on from anywhere in the world without ever getting off or watch the recording after the fact. And that's the simplest way to capture learning today. So if you have embedded virtual capabilities and classroom capabilities, you can bring on SMEs to take that company-specific stuff that's so fast changing, you can't keep up with formal courseware. It makes an enormous impact. Let me switch gears and move to Richard. Richard, you represent Udemy. If you want to speak to both corporate training and what you see people beginning to take advantage of a cloud of learning out there, as well as the aspirational and lifelong learning elements that companies are also looking to now pay for as they try to retain employees, while employees, of course, look to improve their careers.
Certainly. I'm very happy to be here. And actually, I was sitting here in the morning, and there was a question asked about Udemy. I was thinking, wow, actually, Udemy does have some recognition, I guess, sort of awareness here in India, and we are very, very happy. So we've been around for 5 years. That, as a matter of fact, we have near 1 million students here in India actually taking our courses. Without much focused marketing effort, right? We talked a little bit sort of in the morning, some panel about it, marketing, whether it's actually mass marketing, whether it's very focused marketing. So for us, mostly more organic marketing, I guess also word of mouth, it demonstrates the power of the platform, right? And it was very interesting. We started really from direct-to-consumer perspective, provide the necessary learning with the expert industry who actually can teach those courses. What we believe is, and we're building the tremendous, what we call the teaching learning platform, as well as the learning platform. So basically, our commission is anybody who has expertise, want to teach, should be able to teach. And we enable them to teach. On the other hand, anybody who actually wants to learn anywhere and connect with the instructor teacher will be able to learn, and that's what we do. So we started from direct consumer perspective, and a lot of folks actually from corporate world took courses from us, then start ask question, well, this is very interesting, compelling courses. What happens if my team does this? should be benefit as well. So we actually get a lot of those email questions. Hey, can you actually provide these courses in some way or shape? And to your point, corporate training is a little different than direct consumer, and in a form that actually can have a little bit more formal training for employee, for a team. So start about, I would say, 2.5, 3 years ago, because there are so many increase sort of demand coming up. We said, well, this might be an interesting business for us to look into that. So we're building what we call Udemy for Business about 2.5 years ago, and really focus on corporate training. Today, the business is actually going very, very fast. Still a smaller piece of the overall business, but we do see a lot of demand, interesting element. And for example, when you have Apple launch new Swift language, right, start summer last year, and there's actually a lot of demand from corporate perspective, and you want to develop apps very quickly, and know where you learn, right? So within 3 days, we have Swift language course on our platform. And you know, this is probably the only place you can learn those type of advanced technology coming up. So a lot of technology change really shaping today's corporate learning. And you have to move very fast and to be relevant for what you do. And to your point, for example, if your boss tells you there's a big job you need to analyze next week about pivot table, you know basic Excel spreadsheets, but you really don't understand the sophisticated sort of analytical work. So what do? You don't need to necessarily finish the entire courses, but you really need to zoom in those 2 or 3 chapters, understand how things work, and you can actually get your job done, then you know everybody happy. So we do see a lot of those changes from consumer and the corporate world, and we provide all those sort of opportunities for both consumer as well as the corporate training to take advantage of today's technology and availability of the different quality content sources.
Okay, fantastic. So, you know, in effect, what you've done is there's an Uberization of learning. Anybody can be a trainer. The subject matter experts can teach. Anybody can consume anytime. And what you're seeing is that something that was built for the consumer is easily accessible as an add-on to what the corporation wants. And we've seen all sorts of these sources come up. So suddenly, the providers don't have to be large companies anymore. Individuals can provide to corporations through routes like yourself, and they can be a teaching army of one that can create specialties. I love the example of spreadsheets that you use. Param was also listening carefully. So why don't I use that to switch gears? Param, of course, teaches individuals and companies to do fantastic financial modeling, especially Excel spreadsheets, and very complicated programming that he's taught us as an investment company to do as well.
Sure. So, I'm audible? Yeah. See, in terms of, I represent EduPristine. We are a training company. We train people in the area of finance, accounting, analytics, digital marketing, so a lot of other concepts as well. And our focus primarily is professional training. So we are purely focused on professional trainings, neither K-12. So higher education, professional training. And again, over there, the skills that we impart are higher end skills. So not really the sales skills, but skills that can help you get, let's say, a white collar job. Now our model is very similar to Udemy. The only difference being that in our topic expert model, we control the structure of the program. So Udemy opens the structure. Anybody can define their own structure. Anybody can become an instructor. Our model is slightly different. We control the structure. So in terms of the content and the structure of the program, we control that. In terms of execution, again, we engage professionals working in the industry to come down and then interact with the students. And again, this fits in well with what he was pointing out in terms of the training being on job. So essentially, professionals providing those trainings. So in terms of content consumption, we have found that that over the last 7 years, definitely things are moving more towards the technology part. That means both individuals as well as corporates now starting to accept online as a training mechanism. So out there, again, the learning management system plays a large role. And apart from that, I think the content and slight customization of the content to be suitable for online delivery plays a large role.
I'm going to make you bring out a point you were making to me at lunch just now, since there's a lot of education providers looking to go online. You were telling me that as you've gone online, it's actually opened new markets for you.
Sure. So So till around 5 years back, we were primarily focused on the Indian market. And again, I think different markets have different, you can say affinity. So till around 5 years, what we saw is that in the Indian market, the primary affinity was classroom training. So we have classroom trainings, again asset-light model, but across India. So that means Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Calcutta, Chennai, Hyderabad. But now we have started approaching other markets as well. So we find that with the blended form of learning, there's a good acceptability in the Middle Eastern market. So that means Jeddah, Riyadh, Muscat, Lebanon, Beirut. So these are the places where sort of people are more keen to buy blended learning. They would like an online component. Apart from that, they would like a classroom component, small classroom component where they can interact. In the African regions, that means Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Angola, Algeria. Again, we find that a similar thing works. I would say that there the acceptance of technology is more, but the infrastructure poses a higher problem. So for example, in let's say a place like Ghana, electricity itself becomes a problem, or Botswana, electricity becomes a problem. So those are the places where sort of we have been able to reach because of technology. One, because of digital marketing, so that we can reach out to the customer. And two, in terms of delivery, yeah, so a part being delivered online and a part being delivered to the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Mayank, why don't you speak to this? You're building sort of the,
yeah,
you're starting on sort of online with blends, with the whole ball of wax.
We're probably the youngest amongst all of us sitting here in terms of the age of the company. We started 6 months back. The company that I represent, that I've co-founded, it's UpGrad. It's an online education platform targeting working professionals. I'll just pick up a couple of points. I think during this discussion and even before that, we kept on hearing that content getting consumed. Trust me, no one wants to consume education content because, as Vivek said, learning is the least of anyone's priority anywhere, unless there is a carrot and a stick. When it comes to corporate training, it becomes even tougher because one other point that was raised, human resource, most of the boards that you will see in Indian sort of industries will not have an HR person part of the board as well. Within the HR also, L&D becomes the least of the priorities. And therefore, the carrot and the stick is even difficult to sort of put enforced in a corporate training environment. And that makes it even difficult for us. The way I see corporate training and the way I've seen corporate trainings in a larger organization is a video screen going on for 15 minutes. And once I've done with it, I have made my credits. And that's how, at least I have gone through corporate training so far. So I think part of that challenge, and I think you also raised earlier, Gaurav, is that education need not be seen as content, need not be seen as technology, need not be seen as faculty member talking to someone. I think as Narayanan mentioned, it has to be a consumer experience. And the customer may be a corporate or an individual, but the consumer is an individual. And therefore, even when you're looking at a corporate training module or the corporate training sector, one has to build that experience, which is a holistic sort of mixture of all of those things, and taking and breaking it down into these individual components is, to me, as of date, corporate training gives a very disjointed experience to consumers, because of which it is still not sort of scaling up to the level where it should scale up to.
Would you like to comment on that?
See, we have our own content developers, and there is a lot of rich content which is there on our LMS. In fact, if I have to look at the number of modules, I think we have reached 3 short of 150 now. 147 modules waiting to be consumed. But if you look at the average consumption rate, it varies across channels, and it is certainly a carrot and stick model which works there. You know, the moment I say that there is an incentive attached to it, you'll suddenly see the consumption going up. But you really don't know whether that consumption has added value to that individual, because knowledge alone is not important. Applicability is also something which plays a major role. Immediately after having consumed, if you ask a few basic questions, just like a consumer, they tend to get flabbergasted. They feel as if, what has happened to them? You know, why are they being tortured like this? So that's the kind of challenge that we face. And typically, the consumption at an overall level is very, very poor. And it goes up only when you call them as a team, you talk to them, tell them that this is very important, you have to really scale up. This is the motto of the company. If you don't scale up, then we don't get what we have thought of initially. So those things work from time to time. But then you have to constantly talk. And that becomes very difficult because you tend to actually not reach to every individual specifically. One thing that I would like to specify here, which has worked for us in the last 1 year or so, is something like a workshop that we did for our store managers. And in that store manager workshop, we picked 4 basic attributes. We said people is something that you are handling, so we will work on your people skills. We will say how you maneuver and how you manage your people. So you look at your guys who are beginners, who are contributors, who are experts in your store, how do you maneuver them. Then there was a skill versus will model which was used. And there was a Pulse 200 that we were targeting from the company. So we said, what is the importance of Pulse 200? How do you drive it? And then we have a program called Tanishq Way of Life. And that's a consumer-centric program. And it has some 10 promises. So we said, how do you focus and what is the importance of each promise getting communicated to customers? So when we did that, immediately after the workshop, we had a 45-day period during which time we wanted them to actually practice everything that they have learned. And after the 45-day program, we said we will have a one-on-one coach for each of you. And we had coaching for about an hour with each of these individuals. And this coaching was done post the 45-day period. And after the 90-day period, we evaluated and certified them. And we used the certification for their promotion and PLPs, you know. The moment it was tied up to that, the seriousness shot up. So probably something like that works, but that is at a much senior level.
Sure. I think you actually touched on 2 themes there. One is motivation. Motivation has to be there. So that's why IIT Test Prep is a hot space. Because the motivation is there, there's enough factors in there. So motivation is critical. But I think you touched on another aspect. Pure play content doesn't tend to get consumed as often. And so even in this era of online and self-paced and as much content and analytics-based content, if nobody consumes it, you don't get any analytics out of it, unfortunately. So, but I think, so then the notion of a coach, a trainer, because the experiences you described can now be done online, can now be extended nationwide or globally. You can do that one-on-one coaching virtually in the platform itself. Vivek, you were speaking about social as well, and peer-to-peer learning becomes even more important. That may be online in a chat fashion, it may be messaging, it may be discussion boards. So the whole notion of the LMS now seems to need to incorporate these sort of SME. What is your comment on that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of companies are, obviously Sabha has been a great LMS provider, but a lot of people are now talking about sort of the beyond LMS world, because LMS, it's like has 100 features that a lot of people don't use. Right, and it's so new, whatever beyond LMS or whatever you want to call it, is going to be more about, I believe, where the sources of learning are all sources of learning, the informal learning, emails, Facebook, YouTube, whatever it is, and are all with the learner at the center. But more importantly, like you mentioned, a certification or a specific outcome. Right, so it has to be specific outcome-driven learning. Otherwise, we know that most learners don't have motivation to learn, right? And so that's the direction. So it won't be so much an LMS where these big systems where everything resides into the server. I think it'll be more an aggregator with an emphasis on user experience. It's LMSs today also, because of the structure, the content that you put in, sometimes the user experience is not as good, right? If you have a HTML5 thing, then, for example, the best user experience on the mobile is through an app and not a HTML5 page, right? So you need to focus on the user experience, aggregate bunch of content and track it very effectively. And one of the things is measurement is very, very weak right now.
Sure.
Right, feedback is based on that one form at the end of the day, which nobody really takes seriously. So I think a lot more you can do when you're online, but it has to be driven.
So all forms of learning and delivery must happen. SMEs, workshops, coaching still seems to be a key part that people seem to relate to heavily. And so the platform must contain these. Richard, have you guys, when you look at the world, both from the consumer and the corporate side, do you see any differential in the drop-offs if there happens to be an attached course? We've seen a small micro industry popping up in India around providing, mentoring next to the MOOC course to help you get through it. It's like your trainer in a gym, taking you through. Have you seen anything like that? Or do you have any experience of the data that you see?
Yeah, we look at students' success factor in a little bit different light. As you pointed out earlier, at the point, we focus mostly on lifelong learning, skill-based learning. So whether you complete courses or not is less a factor in terms of how we interpret and student happy or not. Actually, we have 5 data scientists who look at this, what we call the student happiness. We have a student index, meaning that do they come to our platform and have they accomplished what they want to actually learn? So, we're looking at sort of 3 different stages. One is discovery, right? You find the course you like to take. Then it's learning. Do you have a good learning experience, engaging, interactive, all those sort of elements? And third, around signal, right? We talk a little bit about certification, assessment, so that gives you some motivation. So all those sort of things are really interactive. And from corporate perspective, obviously, there's a little bit sort of monitoring, reporting element for that. For example, some corporations incorporate learning as part of job evaluation. When they do that, in a way, force you to learn, because if you don't, you didn't finish what you need to finish, then you may not get a good evaluation, right? So when some of corporations actually incorporate that, then you see engagement is going up. Whether it's actually forced or really sort of motivated, I'm not exactly sure. But what we do see that there's a little bit sort of a different behavior versus direct consumer versus corporate training. Corporate training, there's an element of monitored, reported, and in some way actually attached to performance bonus, so on and so forth. The consumer side, it's entirely, I would say for the most part, actually self-motivated, because nobody really say you have to finish chapter 7 by what time. For the folks actually indeed do that. On the flip side, and again, we are really focused on what we call the lifelong learning. So we look at, do you finish one course, you go on for another course, in third, fourth course. So on average, people taking about 3-5 courses. And if we see a student progressive from, let's say, beginning course to mid-level course to advanced course, certainly that student actually not only engaged, but also getting what they want and gradually progress. And particularly if that actually happens in one particular subject, we see that student actually progress. And not necessarily they finish entire course, but they continue moving on. So there are many actually signals in our platform to tell us how students actually learn. That's why we have the student happiness index, which is actually not same as the completion rate.
Okay. Let me switch gears a little bit again. If you can just speak to it for 1 minute, and I'm going to ask Mayank to comment a little. So now you're using all forms of learning. You have to use virtual classrooms, you use trainers. You also go outside for both trainers and training. So when you go outside, what do you really look for? What do you feel you can't feel that, or you wish that you could have picked off the shelf from outside? And how do you see maybe technology being applied to some of that?
See, typically when you look for training, you get a lot of people in the soft skill space. You don't tend to get people who can integrate soft skill with business. And that is the biggest challenge that we see, And there are very few chosen ones. In fact, when we discuss, these guys come up with big promises, but the delivery is very poor. And we don't get the confidence, Finally, he's saying all this, will he be able to deliver? In fact, I'll give you one example. I moved from business, and I moved into retail training recently. And I have seen business for the past 15 years, and I have been in sales across India, except for North. I have worked in almost all the territories. And when the trade team actually came up with a challenge saying that we are not confident enough to handle our distributors, we don't know how to handle dealers, especially after the integration of the brands. We spoke to Pegasus, very, very renowned training company, and they just couldn't create anything for us. In fact, in the business space. And that became a huge challenge. Then I said that probably I should take up this onus. I will train these guys. And when I spoke to the team, in fact, I did that in both East and West. And these guys felt that somebody is touching their heart, you know, because I have lived and dealt with all their problems that they are encountering now. And I could actually sense that and deliver that. Probably that is something which is missing. So whenever, see, I can't be doing everywhere. So that is the place where we look out for people from outside to get content and delivery.
And I think that's interesting because, as you said, something that crosses domains, it joins soft skills to business, whereas companies that have traditionally set up in education have tended to be sort of very sort of curriculum focused and they're just repeatably delivering it. But the moment SMEs come into play, the moment virtual deliveries come into play, you can bring in experts that have lived it into play. So those would be interesting. Mayank, what do you, I'll ask you the last question because I think we're starting to run out of time.
No, sure. So I think to add few things, right? One is the point on coach that you mentioned. I think the way we are doing education, we do need a mother who always tells us that eat the vegetable and finish it off. And I think that role a coach can play very, very actively. I think we don't see coaches as someone who comes in and teaches you something, but at least keeps you motivated as your gym trainer, as you rightly mentioned. In terms of the content, one of the things what Narayanan mentioned, I think the key challenge, and it's also a skill set lacking in India, which is taking the problem statement and building into a learning object or learning material. The pure play instruction design abilities are there, but when it comes to pedagogy and experience design, that absolutely misses out. And therefore, what he knows, codifying it into a nice story from the first principles is something that we tend to probably don't do a good job of, and hence the content that we come out is a Doordarshan of 1990, whereas we wanted HBO of 2015. Yeah. So that's probably a disconnect that happens when we take the content from the SMEs.
All right, I think I'll make one quick comment and I'll open the floor for the last couple of questions. You know, here's a gentleman who has 50,000 learners to teach. His custom he needs somebody who can produce content with quality, consistently, reliably, in the right fashion, whether it's self-paced or coached, and he wants a mechanism to deliver it reliably across 50,000 people in short time frames. So if you can solve those problems, you have a great business. So when we talked about online, consumer-facing, who wouldn't want to have 50,000 users available? Just want to make the point that technology now allows all of it, but as Mayank said, you've got to put the pieces together. And let's not only do IIT prep, please. We can do 2 questions. We have just about 2 minutes left, so real questions, please, no commentary.
Hello, my name is Neev.
Okay, why don't you go first? You got the mic first. We'll come to you.
You can go first.
That's fine. Ladies first.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Not
go
a
ahead.
rule. Okay. I'm Ms. Neeti Mudgal, and I do have my own business, Neeti Education Services. I'm into test prep as well as corporate training, and I have been recently invited by IIT. Now, that's it about me. I just wanted to ask you one question. We have been talking about sales, right? What is sales to revenue? Is, retention, the same thing. If we talk about retention, we have to be, value creation should be there. So, what I mean to say is, what is selling to revenue? Value creation is to retention. Is it there? My real question is, because of the demand in India, what is happening right now, there's a lot of demand in education, but value creation is not there. So, a business can sustain even if they are not creating any value. Can they sustain just because of the demand?
I didn't quite get the question.
Okay, I am asking that there's a demand, right? There's a demand in education.
Sure.
Right? And some of the businesses are actually sustaining in the market even if they are not creating any value.
Are you asking about training businesses? Can a training business sustain if they don't produce any outcomes or value?
Any education business, education business.
I'll make a general comment. Any business that doesn't eventually produce value for its customers can't sustain.
Exactly.
Okay, we agree with you.
Yeah, but I just wanted to ask, there are certain times like people only do marketing, right? And they do not add value. Sometimes they do sustain As in,
I think we'll stop at that one. We'll go offline. You and I can chat more.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, but yeah, you have to add value. Last question.
Hi, Mr. Mehra, my question's for you. I guess my interpretation of the panel discussion's been focused more on the problem side, right? We haven't really delved into the solution space, right? So the problem, as I see, is that training right now is more of a push, The challenge is to create a pull within the corporate training domain. Do you think immersive gamification offers an answer for that?
Who wants to take that one? I think that's yours.
So see, pull, there's nothing training can do to create a pull in me, right? I have to want to learn. Training can only make it easy for me to learn, more interesting learn if I want to learn. Right? So to her point, 200 million children in Indian schools, they're going into classrooms, something is happening. How many are learning? Very few. So a large part of it, what we've been talking about, learner motivation. I don't know.
I mean, the motivation, to your point, I think it can be made a pull only if you create an ecosystem around it. Like you mentioned that you have to do this to be able to sort of get promoted. You need to have these kind of training done in order to become CFA level 1, level 2, level 3. I think if it's linked to tangible outcomes, then a pull gets created. In general, you have the movies and the serials of the world that you can go and watch, but probably not get educated is what my learning so far has been.